Hello there and welcome. In this episode, we're going to add seasons and weather that is based on these seasons into our game. This will be an expansion of our time manager and the day-night system, so make sure you watch the episode where we created them. I also added a link to that episode in the description. First, we're going to open the time manager because this deals with the time of the game, and seasons are basically just some sort of period of time, so it's a good place to put all of this logic. The first thing we want to do is create an enum for the different seasons. So over here we're going to add an enum that will be named season. And of course we're going to add all the seasons and also make sure that the order is correct. Next we're also going to add a reference to the current season. And the first season is going to be the spring. If you want to start your game in another season, you can simply set it over here, but we're going to start with the spring. Next, we're going to add two more properties. So we're going to have an int that will be the days per season. Of course, you can control it, but every 30 days, we're going to skip to another season. Then we also want to have some kind of counter that will be the days in the current season, because we need to count what is the day inside the season. Next, we're going to reach our trigger next day method, and over here we need to add some logic to actually change the season when this counter is done. So when we trigger the next day, as always, we're going to increase the days in game, but we also want to increase the days in current season. And then we simply check if the days in current season is bigger than the days per season. So when we reach 31 days in our counter, it's going to know that we should change the season. It's going to reset the counter, and then we're going to get the new season and set it to be the current season. Then of course we're going to invoke the event. But we also want to take this part and add it into its own method because we're going to use this a lot, so we don't want to write this code over again. So let's just Control X to cut this, and we're going to create a new method for this. And we're going to paste it inside. And now we can take this and call this method over here. Now, it's up to you, but you can also change the string that will display the day in game, and we are also going to add the current season. So we're going to do something like this and simply display the current season, so the player will know what is the current season. Now we need to generate this method to get the next season, so we're going to generate this method. So in order to get the next season, we're going to have an integer that will be the current season index, and we are going to convert our current season enum to be an int. And that's just because there is no way to actually move to the next enum inside of this possible enums, right? Because we want to take this spring enum and change it to be the summer enum over here. But there is no way to do it using some kind of built-in method. We cannot just say, go to the next enum on the list. So for this, we're going to get the index of this list. So the index will be 0, right? Because we are in the spring, and we're simply going to add 1 to it, so it will become summer. And that's exactly what we're doing over here. We're getting our current index, so this will be 0, right? Because spring is 0. And then we're going to simply add 1 to it. So it's going to be summer. And of course, when we're going to reach summer, we're going to add 1 to it. It's going to be fall. And then when we get to the fall and we add 1 to it, it's going to be winter. But when we get to winter and we add 1 to it, it's going to be 5. And there is no 5 inside this list. That's why we do this modulus 4. And this will simply cut out this 1 and it will reset all of this to be 1 again. And then after we get the actual index of the next season, we're simply casting it into a season enum, right? Because if we got 1, then we don't want to return an integer, we want to return a season. So to know what is the season, we simply cast it to be a season, so 1 will become summer. Okay, so this just resets the number after 4, so we don't get an out of bounds error. So we always, when we get to winter and we add 1 to it, it will always go back to spring and it will not go beyond that because there is nothing after winter. Now, another thing that you need to consider for the style of your game is if you want to display the days in game for the player to know, or you want to show the current day of the season, right? Because the day in game will continue indefinitely. It will be 0, then 1, then 2, and it will eventually go to 300 and 1,000, right? Depending on the amount of days the player is playing the game. But if you want the player to just know what is the day inside the current season, then you can simply take this days in current season instead of this. So it will be the 1st of spring, the 2nd of spring, the 3rd of spring. So you need to decide how you want to display it to the player. We're going to leave it this way because there is no need for the player to know what is the day in game. This is something that we're going to keep just for ourselves, for different calculations. But of course, it depends on you. Maybe you do want to let the player know how many days he survived. Of course, you can also add years to it, right? So after he reaches winter and then he goes back to spring again, we can simply increase the year in game by 1. This is something very simple, but we're not going to deal with this right now because we want to deal with seasons. If you really want to know how to do it, it's very simple. You're simply going to have some kind of public int year in game, right? And it will be 0 at the beginning, right? The year in game will be 0 or maybe 1 in the beginning, it doesn't matter. But then when you get the next season and you actually get to the first time you go from winter to spring, then over here you're going to get next season index. It will be 0, right? Because it's going to reset everything. So we can simply say if next season index is 0, then simply increase the year in game by 1. Because as I told you, spring is 0, summer is 1, fall is 2, winter is 3, right? This is the index. So when we get to the winter, it's going to add 1 to this index. So it's going to be 4. But because we don't have 4 inside our enums, right? We start with 0. Because we don't have 4, it's going to simply do modulus 4. So it's going to return 4 modulus 4. It's going to return 0. And then we're going to get 0 over here, and we're going to know that we got back to spring. We're going to increase the year by 1, and we're going to set spring as the season. So now let's test this. I don't want to wait 30 days to actually see the change. So just for testing, I'm going to set 2 days per season. So we only have to wait 2 days to actually change the season. And of course, before we test this, we need to make sure that we're calling this method in the start method, because at the moment we're still having the old string without the season. So we're going to remove this and call this update UI. So it's going to show the season at the beginning as well. So now, as we can see, it says day 1, spring. And now when we wait 2 days, it's going to advance to be summer, and then fall, and then winter, and then it's going to go back to spring again. And because we set 2 days per season, it's only going to reach 2 days, and then it's going to reset back to 1. So let's wait a bit. And we can see that it's summer and we got back to day 1, but of course in your case you can set it to be 30 days, so it's going to be a significant amount of time that the player needs to wait. And of course, just to have these seasons is not enough because they actually need to affect the game in a way, right? Of course, you can have different events, you can have events happening in the summer, maybe some kind of festival in the summer, then when you reach winter, it's going to get cold and you're going to have a different landscape with snow, so you can have a lot of different things going on in different seasons. We are not going to deal with all of this, but we are going to have a weather that is going to be based on these seasons. Now, before we add the weather, I also want to add the day of week into our system because I'm assuming someone will ask how to do this in the future, so in order to prevent this, let me show how to do it. Inside the time manager, we're going to also add the enum for the different days of the week. Then we also need a reference to the day of week. And we're going to start with Monday. Now we're going to scroll down to the trigger next day, and over here after we do this, but before we check the season, we also want to increase the day of week. Now over here we do exactly the same thing that we did over here. We simply increase the index and then we do modulus 4 to make sure that we did not go beyond the amount of seasons. So over here we do it in one line. We simply get the current day of week. We convert it into an integer. So for Monday we're going to get 0 as the index. Then we add 1 to it, and then all of this will become 1 basically. And then we also check that it's not more than 7, and we cast everything into a day of week. So we're going to get Tuesday, and we're going to set it to be the current day of week. And of course, when it's going to reach Sunday, which is index 6, then we're going to add 1 to it, so it will become 7, but because there is nothing inside 7 over here, right, there is no index 7, then it's simply going to do modulus 7 and it's going to return 0, so it's going to be Monday again. And if you think about it, you could also do it over here in one single line. This is just so it will be a bit clearer and a bit more understandable, but you can do the same thing in one line in this shorter way. Now, after we have the current day of week, we also want to display it to the player. Of course, it's up to you if you want to display it to the player. So we're going to do something like that. We're going to show the day of week. Then we're going to remove this. We're going to have a little space. And then we're going to show the days in current season. And then we're going to show the season. And now we can see that it's Monday, the 1st of spring. And of course, it's going to increase every day. And with this day of week system, you can do different things like have some kind of schedule for your NPCs, for your different shops. Maybe some shops will be open on different days. Maybe they're going to be closed on Saturday. Maybe your NPCs will do different things and different activities on different days of week. So it's useful, and it also adds some kind of realism to your game. Now we want to create the actual weather system. It's not going to be something too complicated. We're only going to have rain, because if we want to have snow, for example, we also need to make the entire terrain snowy, but this is something a bit more complex, and even in bigger games and bigger studios, they never actually make the snow appear when it's snowing. You usually go to an area where there is already snow, and then it keeps snowing in this area. I never saw a game where it actually starts snowing and then the entire ground starting to be snowy. so it's something a bit more complex to do. Of course, it's doable, but it's a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. We're going to have rain, and of course, you can expand upon it, and exactly the same way add snow, add wind, add tornadoes, add fog, or whatever weather you want. So we're going to add a new manager. It will be an empty object. We're going to call it weather system, and we're going to create a script with the same name, weather system. Inside, we're going to have a chance to rain for every season because we want to make a difference between the different seasons. For example, in the winter, there will be a higher chance of rain than the summer. So we're simply going to have a float for this chance. And we also want to display some kind of slider in the inspector, so we can do it by saying range and then between 0 and 1. Then we're going to duplicate this for the other seasons. So we're going to set the chance in the spring to be about 30%, right? This is 30%. In the summer, we want to make it, well, basically 0 because we don't want any rain in the summer. Obviously, sometimes there is rain in the summer, so you can put it at something very low or maybe even something like that, but we're just going to keep it at 0. In the fall, we're going to increase it to be 4, and in the winter, we're going to make it very high, like 7 or something like that. So this is 70% chance. So it means there is a chance of 70% that it will rain. Now, we can create random rain through the day. So for example, the player is walking around and then it starts raining. It's possible to do it, and of course you can change the entire system to make it work this way. We're going to make it a bit more simple. So when we reach midnight, we're going to decide if it's going to rain through this day. And again, I'm using Stardew Valley as an example. When the player goes to sleep and then wakes up in the morning, it either rains for the rest of the day or not. Then we also want to add two properties, one for the material that will be the skybox. It will be some kind of rainy gray skybox, and one will be for the actual particle system for the rain effect. Then we also want to have a boolean to know if it's a special weather, and by special weather I mean everything that is not the regular sunny weather. Then we also want to have an enum for the weather conditions. We're only going to have a rainy day or a sunny day, but of course if you add other weathers, you need to add it over here. And we're going to have our current weather. So of course we're going to start with sunny as default. Now inside the start method, we want to subscribe to the same onDayPass event that we subscribe to in our plan script, right? We want to know when a day is passing in order to check if it should rain. And we don't need to use it inside an update method to keep checking it. We can simply register or listen to this event, and when this event is triggered inside this trigger next day, we can see this onDayPass invoke. And I explained about Unity events in the previous episode, or 2 episodes ago, I don't remember, but basically we invoke this event, and then inside the weather system we can simply register to this event, so when it happens we're going to call some kind of method. So we simply go into the time manager and we find this onDayPass event, and then we register to it. And we want to call some kind of method when this event is happening. So it's going to be a method named generateRandomWeather. So let's generate this method. And this method will be quite long, but I'm going to explain everything when I'm done. So inside this generate random weather, we're going to get the current season from the time manager, and we're going to have it locally inside this method so we can use it. First of all, we're going to set the chance to rain to be 0, and then we're simply going to have a switch case to check what is the current season. So if it's spring, we're going to set the chance to rain to be the chance to rain in the spring, and the same for all the other. And then we can check if the random value that we create is smaller or equals the chance to rain. And if it is, it means that it should be rainy, so we set the condition to be rainy, we set is special weather to be true, and we set the skybox to be our rain skybox. Then we start the rain, and by start rain, I mean starting the particle system. So we're going to generate this method, and if it's not, so if the random value is not smaller or equals the chance to rain, it means that it should not rain, so we're going to stop the rain or not start the rain from the beginning. Now inside both of these methods, we're going to start the particle system, and our particle system is the rain effect. So rain effect, we're simply going to activate the game object or deactivate it. Now we're going to open our day-night system because over here we changed different skyboxes and we want to prevent from all of this happening if we have a special weather, right? We don't want to change the skybox to be night, sunrise, day, sunset, evening, right? We don't want to change these skyboxes. We only want to have our rain skybox. So in order to stop all of this from happening, we need to prevent this update skybox method from being called. And we can do this by simply checking if there's a special weather. Because if there's a special weather, we're going to use the skybox of the special weather. So first of all, let's add a reference to our weather system. And then over here, we're going to simply surround it with an if statement. And then we check if weather system is special weather is false. So if it's not a special weather, then keep updating the skybox. But if it is a special weather, don't do this. We want to prevent this from happening if there's a special weather. Because if there is a special weather, we're setting the skybox manually over here. Now before we forget to do all of this, let's click on the day-night system object and we're going to drag a reference to the weather system. So we take the weather system and we drag it inside. Then inside the weather system, we need a reference to the rain effect and the rain skybox. So we go to the folder with all of our skyboxes, and I'm using all of these for the day-night system. So we also have this rainy gray one. So I'm simply going to drag it into the rain effect. Well, actually into the rain skybox, and now we have a reference to this skybox. Now we want to create the rain effect. So the rain effect will be some kind of particle system that will drop drops of rain on our player. Obviously, in order to improve the performance, we're not going to have rain all over the map. We're simply going to have rain over the player, and then it's going to look like there is rain all over the map. You can decide what is the area, but we're going to make it very small, and if the player is going to move, it's going to move with the player. Now, because our player is built this way that when we look down or up, it rotates the entire player, it's also going to rotate the particle system. So it's not going to work. It's going to look weird because the rain is going to fall in an angle. So we do want the rain to follow the player, but not rotate with the player, right? If he looks down, if he looks up. So for this, we're going to create some kind of empty object and we're going to name it follow player. We want to make sure that it's over the player. So we're simply going to drag it into our player. We're going to make sure that it's reset at 0, 0, 0, 0. And we're going to drag it above the player. And now we can take it out of the player because we don't want this to be a child of the player. Inside this follow player, we're going to have a new game object and we're going to name it rain effect. And then inside this rain effect, we're going to have our particle system. So we go to effects, particle system. And we can see the particle system starting, although this is not the way it's going to look. So we can just stop it for now and focus on this part. Now, in order to make this entire particle system follow the player but not rotate with the player, right? Because we could simply place it to be a child of the player and it will follow the player. But then if the player rotates, it's going to rotate with the player. That's why we set it outside of the player. So it will not be a child of the player, but we still want this to follow the player. So on the follow player object, we're going to have a new script named the same way. And this will be a very simple script. So we're going to simply have a transform of the player, and then inside the late update method, we're going to keep updating the player's position to become the target position, and then we're going to set the transform position of this follow object to be the target position. So it will basically follow the player without being a child of the player. Now we're going to select the follow player object and we're going to drag the player into this reference. Now the offset is something that you can control, but we already dragged this follow player above the player. So we already did this manually. If you want to do it using the code, maybe you want to change the offset, maybe you want to change the offset of the rain while the game is running, you can change the values over here, and then it's going to simply move this follow object to have some kind of offset, right? But we don't want to touch this because we already set it to be above the player. We can also make it a bit higher. Now we're going to create the actual particle system. So we click on this particle system, make sure that both of these are resetted so everything is at 0. Now inside the particle system, first of all, we are going to go to shape, and over here we're going to change it to be box. Then we're going to go to the scale, and on the X we're going to change it to 20 and on the Z 20 as well. Next we're going to find velocity over lifetime and we're going to enable it. Now we also want to change some values, so we're going to find the first one, the linear. We're going to click on this arrow and we're going to change it to be random between two constants. And we're going to change the Y to be -25 and -35. So now the rain is going to fall down and have some kind of gravity. Next, we're going to find the renderer, and inside we're going to change the render mode to be stretch billboard. And now it's going to make the little droplets to be a bit more stretched and it will look like rain. Next, we're going to go to the top part, and over here inside 3D start size, we're going to enable it and make it random between two constants, and we're going to change it to be 0.1, 0.1 on the X, 1 and 2 on the Y, and 0.1, 0.1 on the Z. We're going to set the start speed to be 0, and the start color we can set to be somewhere in the middle, so about 75. So it will start with some kind of transparency, and then we're going to see the actual color. Next, we're going to find the emission, and we're going to change the rate over time to be something between 200 and 400. I find that 400 is the best one because it really gives us this full rain effect. Now you can see that the rain keeps falling under the ground, and there is no need to actually keep these particles alive. We only want them to reach the surface. So for this, we're going to find the collision. We're going to enable it. We're going to change the type to be world. And we're going to change these values a bit. So dampen will be 1. Bounce will be 2. And lifetime loss will be 0.4. Now we're basically done, so we can select the rain effect and the particle system and disable both of them. Well, actually, we don't need to disable the particle system, just disable the rain effect. Now we're going to select the weather system and drag the rain effect itself into this slot. Now before we test this out, there's a small adjustment that I want to do, and we simply need to add some kind of delay before we call this start rain method, and that's just because the way Unity works. So over here, we're simply going to use invoke, and we're going to use the name of the method, and we're going to add a delay of 1 second. So we're going to call this method using invoke. And then we're going to take this thing and we're going to add it into the start rain method. So this will happen a bit later, and this way it's going to show the skybox and not get erased. Another final thing that I want to do is add some kind of sound for the rain. So we're going to add a reference over here to the public audio source. We're going to name it rain channel, and we're going to add an audio clip, rain sound. Then inside the start rain, let's just move this over here. Inside the start rain, we're going to start the sound. And we're going to stop it when we stop the rain. And of course, we also want to make sure that it loops. So rain channel, loop, through. Now over here, we need to add an audio source. We're going to remove play on awake because it's not going to rain at the beginning. We're going to drag it inside the rain channel, and we can adjust the sound later. Then we're going to find some kind of rain sound. I have it over here. So I'm going to drag it inside this slot. And now we can play the game and see that everything is working. Of course, in order to make sure that we get rain, we go to the weather system, and the first season is going to be spring. So let's just increase the chance to be very, very high. So we can make it just 1. It means 100% chance that at midnight it's going to start raining. Although even if we put like 90%, I'm sure it's going to start raining. So we're going to set it at 1. There's a small problem that I did not notice. Inside the start rain method, by mistake I set it to be false. This needs to be true, and over here it needs to be false. So you probably noticed this, and I didn't notice this by now. Now, after we made these changes, in order for everything to work correctly, we also need to do a small adjustment inside the day-night system. And over here inside the update skybox method, we are triggering the next day. But because now we have this condition, and sometimes we're going to prevent from this method to be called, then the next day is not going to be triggered. So if you're going to have a rainy day, tomorrow will never come. So we simply take all of this and we cut it and we place it over here inside the update method after this if statement. So this will always run, and it doesn't matter if there's rain or not, we always want to trigger the next day. So now we're going to wait till midnight and we're going to get rain. You can see that it started raining, and now we can just walk around, and this rain effect is going to keep following us, right? And doesn't matter where we go, it's just going to keep following us. And even if we look up and down, it will still fall down. It's not going to rotate, but it will follow us. So obviously you can play around with the particle system, you can add more emission, you can make the rain look more dense, maybe you can change the actual particles, maybe you can even go beyond that and create puddles when it's raining and things like that. But this is the basic way to create this weather system. And if you want to add another weather, you're simply going to add it over here. So let's say snowy. And then over here, you're going to maybe also have a chance for snow, right? So you can have a chance for snow in the winter that will be, or even if you only want it to snow in the winter, then you can simply say, if the current season is winter, then start the snow. But if it's another season, then don't start the snow. There is so many possible ways to create these systems depending on your game, so I cannot cover all of these examples. So that's all for this episode. We created a weather system and we have seasons, we have the day of the week. Now you can use these things to create many more systems in your game, some schedule for the different NPCs, some events that are going to happen in specific seasons or maybe in specific days of the week. You can have weather, you can have anything that you want, and your imagination is the limit. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe. You can also leave a like. It will help me a lot. You can also leave a comment, even if you don't have anything to say, just so the algorithm will promote my video and make my channel grow. So I'll see you next time.